Welcome to the OnTarget HTML5 website YouTube channel. The website is dedicated to teaching web development technologies in HTML5, HTML, CSS, CSS3, PHP, MySQL, Flash, and the XML scripting language. We'll soon be adding a section on JavaScript, so I hope you visit us at www.ontargethtml5.com. Welcome back to the HTML5 Essential Training Series. In this tutorial, we are going to talk about inline level elements. We just finished discussing block level elements. Now let's go ahead and get into discussing some inline level elements and how they play a part in our design of our HTML documents. Inline level elements. Within the body of a document, you can code two types of elements, inline elements and block level elements. We just finished discussing the block level elements. Now let's take a look at inline level elements and see how they impact our pages. In contrast to the block level elements, inline elements do not start a new line. Instead, an inline element is coded within a block element. Inline elements are elements that flow in line with the text. During this exercise, we'll look at some of the most common inline elements and we'll demonstrate how they are used inside of our HTML documents. There are a wide variety of inline level elements in HTML. Let's look at a chart that covers the available inline elements for formatting text inside of our HTML document. The first thing you'll notice is, and actually the first element that we're going to talk about is the italics element, which we've already demonstrated in a previous tutorial. But you'll notice that the opening tag is an I, the closing tag is the /I, then we have the bold element, we have a subscript element, a superscript element, and then an empty element that starts a new line. It's like a carriage feed in a word processor. We also have some identifying inline elements. We have an element for abbreviations. We have an element for citations used to indicate a bibliographic citation, like the title of a book. We have an element for code, used for computer code, which is displayed as a monospace font. It's similar to the pre-element that we looked at earlier, the pre-tag that we looked at earlier. We have a definition element used for special terms that can be defined elsewhere. We have an emphasis element that's very similar to the italics element, and normally emphasis is used more for those screen readers that we talked about in a previous tutorial. We have a keyboard entries element, again displayed in a monospace font. We have a quotations element or tag. We have a sample element used to mark a sequence of characters, a sample of characters. We have a strong element that is used for bold, again very similar to the B element, and again for screen readers. And then we have a var element, or a var tag, used for computer variables, and again displayed in monospace. So let's go ahead and go into our development environment and let's look at some of these. Let's get some examples of some inline elements in HTML. Alright, so let's go ahead and look at some examples inside of our. First thing you'll notice is I've got my Apache web server up and running. Everything's running as it should be for us to do our demonstration, so I'm hoping you have your web server up and running also. Let's go ahead and bring up our web browser. You'll notice I am in the HTML5 tutorial section, Inline Elements. I've got my basic, I'm going to go ahead and bring up my text editor, my Sublime Text 2. I've got my chapter 8_01 file, which is my basic HTML template, loaded up inside of my web root. In other words, my chapter 8 file in my web directory. And let me show you what I've done here. I've actually moved in the CSS folder from the previous tutorial. I've moved in our images folder from the previous tutorial. And you'll notice I'm going to do that from now on as we move through these exercises. I'm going to move in these images and CSS files, and as we build more directories into our web root, I'm going to move those in also because we'll be using those as we progress through this training. Okay, so we've got all of our stuff set up. I've got my basic HTML5 document set up, and the first thing I want to do is let's demonstrate what we talked about with these inline elements. And these are the ones that we've seen in the past. I'm going to go ahead in the examples file or exercise file. I'm going to go ahead and grab example number 1 and bring that into my document, and it's basically just an italics tag. We talked about it earlier. I'm going to do a save as and save this document as chapter 802. I'm going to go ahead and refresh my browser window so we can load that into our screen And you'll notice we've got a standard inline element that gives us an italics text. And we did the same thing, and we did this earlier. We actually have done the same thing with a bold tag. So let's look at the bold tag, and we'll put that one right below it. Let's go ahead and save those changes, refresh the browser, and now you'll see that we've got an inline, bold, inline italics, and as we discussed before, these elements, because they're inline, they don't take up the full vertical space of the browser window. If we actually wanted these to appear on two separate lines, we'd either have to enclose them in a block level element like a P tag, which you're going to see in a minute, or we could actually use another one of those inline elements that we talked about in our presentation, the BR tag, which is a break tag and gives us a line feed. So if I were to add that break tag to the end of that first inline element, refresh my browser window, you'll notice now that the bold slips below the italics because BR is an inline element, but it actually is an inline element that gives a break to our inline element tag. Now, what we've just done, I mean, we actually know that what the tags are doing. They're actually giving us emphasis or bold text. They're giving us italics or an emphasized text. But it's not truly an inline element until you see it used inside of a block tag. So let's do an example of a paragraph tag with inline elements included in them. And you'll notice here I've got my, let's go ahead and save. I'm going to do a save as. Again, all these files will be in your exercise files folder if you've purchased the tutorial. And I've got a paragraph tag here. And what I've done is I've got my paragraph tag, which we know is a block level tag because we've covered it in the previous exercise. I'm going to go ahead and stick a break in here so it doesn't run all this stuff together on us. But you'll notice is inside my paragraph tag, I've also got an inline element tag using bold text. So if I refresh my browser, actually I got to go back and reload my browser window because we've changed our file. And I bring that up, you'll notice now, again, we're still outlined. In fact, let me load up that CSS file so we can take that outlining away. But notice that inside of our block level paragraph tag, we have an inline level, which is giving us that bold text. So the difference between the block level and inline is actually inside, or normally used inside of a block level. Let's go ahead and bring up that paragraph tag for a minute, or that CSS file for a minute, so we can disable that P tag. I don't want that outlined right now. We're going to do it in a minute. We'll outline it again in a minute once I want to demonstrate something else, but I want you to see that we have this inline with our block level element, and that's why it's called an inline level element. And I actually have a better example in the next one. Let's go ahead and bring another paragraph tag from example 2 inside of our example files folder. Let's go ahead and put this inside of our body tag. Go ahead and get my text right. And I've done something a little different here because what I've actually done is I've actually nested two inline elements inside of our block element. And let me expand this so you can see what I'm talking about. You'll notice that I've got my block level element P. Then I come to an inline element, my I. I've got another inline element where the I ends, but inside the inline, I've got another inline. So I've got italics and level. And you'll notice that as one starts and stops, I got my opening tag, my closing tag, my opening tag, my closing tag, opening tag, my closing tag. So you can nest inline inside of inline elements. Let me go ahead and do a save as on this. We'll save this as example number 4. And let's save it. Let's go ahead and refresh our screen. Load up example 4. And now you'll notice in that paragraph tag, not only do I have my italics, but I've also picked up the bold from that emphasis of bold inside that level. So you see the block level are the P tags, and I've got two inline elements and ends with the block level. And I'll make it a little clearer in the next demonstration. We'll actually use CSS so we can do with these inline levels what we did with the block levels in the previous examples. In our next example, let's go in and make some changes like we did with the block level elements so you can visually see the difference between a block level and a inline level element. first thing I want you to notice, I've cleaned out our main.css file, taken all the entries out. We're going to go ahead and put those in based on just what we're going to demonstrate for this particular exercise. And we're on chapter 8_04. I'm going to go ahead and save that as chapter 8_05 because we're going to be making some changes to it. This would also be a good time for you to stop and pause the video if you need to copy down this file, or if you need to type this file in if you don't have access to the exercise files. And then I'm going to go ahead and go into our main.css file, and from example 3 in our exercise folder, I'm going to go ahead and bring in some formatting or some styling for the 3 tags that we're currently using in our document, our P tag, our B tag, and our I tag. And let's go ahead and save that file in our CSS folder. And you notice we are referencing the file right here. We are still referencing that CSS file in that CSS folder, so that we now, when we bring this, or when we refresh this screen and bring up our 05, which we're going to do right now, we should actually be able to visually see the difference between the inline elements and the block level elements. And as you can see, the inline elements, unlike the block levels, which are 2 paragraph tags, are block level elements. You can see the black line that extends the entire length of the browser. It takes up all vertical space, as we discussed in our presentation. But you'll notice the inline elements do not. They're strictly limited to their size. And again, the padding between the edges of the text and the inline level elements is all considered by default in the browsers themselves. I have checked, or I have run this in 3 or 4 different browsers prior to doing the exercise. They're all almost identical. So the browsers are becoming much more compatible, shall we say. There's not a lot of differences now between the browsers as there were in days of old when we were actually writing our HTML and CSS files for each individual browser. But this gives you a visual indication of the differences between the block level and the inline level elements. Let me do something so you can actually separate this a little bit. Let's put a little bit of padding on this paragraph tag. And again, don't expect you to understand all the CSS we're doing here, because I know that you're brand new to this. I'm just going to add some padding around that around that paragraph tag. And what this does is, because I didn't designate, and I just put padding 3 pixels, that's 3 pixels on the top, right, bottom, and left. So I should get 3 pixel space between the entire paragraph element as I refresh it. And you'll notice now that we've actually moved it away from our text, and you can get a better feeling. You can actually see better those. In fact, let's make it 4. Get a little bit more spacing in there so you can actually see the spacing and see the difference between the inline level elements and the block level. And if I were to add some spacing to our dotted blue also, if I were to make this one 10, let's really separate it from our text. Then let's make our blue, give it some padding of 4 pixels all the way around. Now you should really be able to see how the block level and inline elements interact with one another. And again, remember that the reason we're seeing this inline level element inside this other inline, if you look back at our text, we actually put that, we actually have that bold tag inside. There's our italics tags, opening and closing, and we actually have that bold tag inside the italics. And that's what you're actually seeing in the browser window. You're actually seeing that bold inline element inside that italics inline element. So I'm hoping that that helps clarify the difference between block level elements in HTML5 and HTML and inline level elements. I mean, it's something that took me a while to grasp because I never had anyone explain it with the outlines. They never really sat down and explained to me what was going on, the differences. I'm hoping this makes it very, very clear for you, so as we move forward in the HTML and as we begin writing our web pages, you'll understand why we're using block level and why we're using inline level. And also keep in mind that we can nest. If I wanted to, I could nest this entire thing. In fact, let's do that as part of our demonstration. I can nest this entire section. I'm going to go ahead and indent this because I like to keep my indentions clean. Makes it easier for me to understand what I'm doing. Inside of another block level element, and if I went in here and put that up here, if I actually added the styling for that block level element, let's make it red so it stands out. Let's make it 2 pixels, and let's actually give it a little bit of padding. So we move, again, we're moving it away from everything around it so you can actually see the differentiation. So we'll give it 3 pixels of padding around it. Now, based on what we've done, if you look at this diagram, everything that's inside our body tag right there should be enclosed in a red square, because our div block level element now is around everything else. So when we refresh this page, let's go ahead and do a save all. And by the way, you should pause your video right there if you need to type in to catch up with where we're at if you don't have access to the exercise files. The only change we made to our Chapter 805 is we added the opening and closing div tags, and you could actually pause here if you need to catch up with that. But when we refresh our screen now, if you've got a good grasp of what we're doing, everything we've done now should be enclosed in a red square based on what we've just done. And we've got that little padding, that breakaway, to give you an idea of how things are nested inside. So you should have a very good grasp now of block level and inline level elements as we move forward with the development of our HTML. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And again, check out our website, www.ontargethtml5.com, for a complete listing of all the tutorials that are available in the development environment. I look forward to your feedback, and thank you for visiting.